props forward, mixture's rich, supercharger's in low, tail wheel is still unlocked, trim is set, mags are both, water rudder is unlocked, and the landing gear is down. I got the boost pumps on, controls, we're all ready to go. Here we go.
And Joe, tell me a little bit about the story of the Candy Clipper.
Well, in the Philippines during World War II, we were driven down on the Bataan, and we were out of airplanes. We were preparing an airfield in Mariveles Harbor, which is the southern part of the Bataan, expecting reinforcement planes to come in. And while one of the group of the airmen were scrounging for food around the area one day, they found 3 U.S. Navy J-2F-2s that had been caught moored on the water in the early days of World War II. They were pretty badly shot up, and they'd been abandoned by the U.S. Navy. One was high enough up on the shore that it was not submerged at high tide. We pulled that up on the shore and bailed the hull out, filled the holes that had been damaged by the attack by the Japs with pieces of rubber inner tubes, refloated it and towed it across the harbor and lifted it up onto the airfield we were building, and my mechanics rebuilt it to make it fly.
And what was the reason why you wanted to get the duck flying? This is a Navy airplane.
Well, there was plenty of food in the southern islands of the Philippines. The Japs had pinned us down on Bataan, and then they'd taken their experienced and trained infantrymen, ground troops, south, and left some untrained ones to wipe us out on Bataan, but they never could do that. But we were running out of food. And there was plenty of food down in the southern part of the Philippines because the Japs didn't have anything down there. And I was planning to fly this duck down to bring food back to Bataan and Corregidor.
How did this name Candy Clipper come about?
Well, every load that I filled with in the hull and in the back seat with stuff that we were trying to get back, such as critical radio tubes and parts and medicines that had been flown in from Australia and offloaded in Mindanao, but they couldn't get into Bataan or Corregidor because there's no way to get in there. The Japs had an ironclad blockade around Manila Harbor. You couldn't get in by boat, and we didn't have airplanes flying. I thought we could use this old bird and fly. And after I'd fill it up with food and stuff, I'd always put a box of candy or some other female things on top for the nurses who were in the field hospital on Bataan. There were about 30 of them. And they had nothing of that, no sweets or anything. And some wag called it the Candy Clipper because I always had a box of candy on the top.
Tell me about the first day of the war on Bataan.
Well, we had been expecting to be hit by the Japanese who were based on Formosa. We had pictures of their planes up there, about 200. The only thing American targets within their range was us. And we had been briefed by my commander, Colonel Hal George, the fighter commander, of the situation politically, and that there was a fighting was imminent, and that we could expect to be hit by these people from Formosa. And we stopped all training flights about 2 weeks before the war began on December the 8th, because we were across the date line. And about 4:30 in the morning on Monday, the December the 8th, we heard that Honolulu was being bombed with Japanese airplanes. So we thought that was being attacked and we could go and attack them, but MacArthur's headquarters refused to give us permission to send the B-17s up to Formosa. So the first light on the Monday morning, all of the fighters took off, pursuit in those days, took off and took us positions we had planned to protect Clark Field. Because Clark Field was the only field in the entire Philippine Islands that loaded B-17s could operate from. And we thought that was important that we protect it. At that time, all of the B-17s, about 35 of them on the ground, took off and flew south just to get off the ground, expecting to be hit early in the morning. The Japs didn't come in. We had to land the pursuit planes to refuel. And about 11:30, while we were refueled, ready to go, pilots in the cockpits waiting on the scramble order, the first flight of Japanese bombers came in and blanketed the field with bombs. And of the 23 planes in my squadron, I lost 20 of them. The only 3 that were flyable at the end of the day was 3 that got airborne. Myself and 2 wingmen got off the ground before the bombs hit. I found out in 1956, when I was in the National War College class that I graduated in Washington, the class was divided into sections, and one section went to the Philippines. I went to the Pacific. We spent 3 days in Japan. And while there, we had long discussions with the Japanese Self-Air Defense Force pilots. One lieutenant colonel spoke perfect English, and he was on that side of the table, and I had my group on this side. And afterwards, there was a little social, and I sought this guy out to ask him how he spoke such good English. He grinned, he said, "I graduated UCLA." And then I came home and joined the Air Corps. I said, "Well, why did you wait so late on Monday to hit us? Instead of first light, you hit us at 12:30 in the morning." He said, "We were supposed to. There was a pea soup fog, the first time in recorded history in Formosa. We couldn't even see the taxi." He said, "We sat in the cockpits for over 4 hours expecting you to hit us, scared to death. And finally it got light enough we could taxi. We took off."
I'll be darned. Tell me a little bit about your flying the P-40.
Well, my squadron had P-40Bs, the first ones to be sent to the Philippines. My squadron was sent to the Philippines in October 1940, a year before the war began. And the first P-40s to come in were given to my squadron because we had flown them in the States before we went over. And we had a great training program because brand new pilots came in from the States to bring us up to wartime strength, and they had not flown the B-40s before. So we had mostly a training system going on for about 4 months, from maybe May up to November, December. We had 5 squadrons there by that time when the war began. There was one in the Philippines when we got there. My squadron was the second one. Another one came in from Selfridge a month later. Then about 4 months later, another squadron came in from the States. And then in about October of 1941, the 5th Squadron came in from the States. And they were being equipped with new P-40s.
Joe, tell me a little bit how you, as a P-40 pilot, got checked out in a Grumman duck.
Well, when we salvaged this old duck, my crew chiefs, who were expert, they could build an airplane. They had repaired it very well. And I happened to visit Corregidor one day while I was on Bataan, and I found that there was a Navy pilot in the hospital in the tunnel on Corregidor. I went in and talked to him, and he told me the characteristics of it, the landing speed, the cruising speed, and some other problems that I should think about. And it turned out that this was his airplane by tail number. He'd flown in the early days of the war. But he had been injured and was still in the hospital. So with his telling me about what to expect, I made the first flight.
And was the first flight during the daytime?
It was just before dark, off the field at Marivelis. The Japs had a habit of, every time we took off from Bataan airfields, their airplanes in Manila would take off and come over to Bataan when they expected us to be on the way back. So we were being pretty careful about that. When we'd go on reconnaissance missions in our P-40s, which is all we did, after MacArthur's orders to not engage in combat after we got on Bataan, he needed the reconnaissance information, so every time we'd go out on a reconnaissance mission and head back, we'd call in on the radio using a dog Latin language or something to see if the coast was clear, and if they gave us the signal that the coast was not clear because of Jap planes, we would go out over the China Sea and go down to Mindoro, just south of Corregidor, where there was a sugar plantation with a little airstrip. We'd land there and stay about 2 hours and then fly back home. Well, I made this flight just before dark that first day so that I wouldn't get caught and I could get back on the ground before it was too dark. So I made just a circle around the field, so to speak, and we figured that the flight down to Cebu, the first safe field to land on going south, was about, that Navy pilot told me I could expect 110 knots cruising. So we figured about 4.5 hours. I'd take off about 4 in the morning, get down there and land at first light. But the plane only made about 90 knots. So I made my second flight on that flight down and landing at Cebu.
And how many flights did you make in the day?
I made 3 round trips.
And with the Japanese now in the area, did you fly in the daytime?
I flew at night,
Just
strictly at night. I never flew in the daytime because of I didn't want to get caught by the Japanese planes. It was still, wasn't very many, but there was some, and I didn't want to get caught flying at 90 knots in a big lumbersome amphibian.
And what all would you put in the duck? Where would you put it? And how about the weight or balance? Or
We put everything we could get in. We filled the hull and the back seat because I was flying along. And we just put it as much as we could get in. I didn't know anything about weights and balances. I was a fighter pilot. And it was overloaded. And the airplane engine it was a strain to keep it above the low clouds that were in the Philippines every night. They'd form, the top's about 8,000. And I'd get up to the top of those. And the maximum power on the engine, you'd use about 36 inches of mercury in the carburetor to get off. And then you're supposed to throttle back less than 30, 28 or thereabouts. But I had to use about 33 inches to stay on top. So I drained a lot of power out of that old engine.
Did you ever have any problems with the duck when you were flying?
Well, my last flight was on April the 7th, I believe it was, coming in at night. And just as I reached Mindoro, where the Japanese naval vessels had a tight blockade around Manila Harbor, they'd always pick me up in the searchlights. Well, on top of that little deck of clouds, the lights didn't hit me exactly. They'd sort of dispersed by the cloud cover. But I was being illuminated by these searchlights, and my engine cut out. I had used so much power that I burned a hole in one piston, we found out later. And I wasn't able to maintain my altitude. The power was reduced and I couldn't stay at that altitude, and I gradually sank on down, and I just barely made it back into Bataan. Before they could fly again, they had to put a new piston on it. which they obtained from one of the other two planes that we had not salvaged because they were mostly underwater.
Now, was that your last flight in the duck?
That was my last flight in the duck.
Tell me about the airplane that maybe it got flown later by other pilots, and tell me about the last flight.
Of the duck? Well, Roland Barnick was the Philippine depot captain, and he had his depot tools and things at the little strip called Cabin down on the southern part of Bataan. He took the piston off of one of the other planes that had been sunk over there in the harbor and repaired this one, and he had a lot of trouble getting it done, and finally finished it on the night of April the 8th. Bataan fell on April the 9th after an all-day long attack. And Roland got this piston ready to go. He put about 6 people in the duck, in the hull, and in the back seat. And on his takeoff, he barely got off the ground. And he was able to get up altitude a couple of 100 to 500 feet, and he flew it down to Panay. That was our last flight.
Tell me a little bit about how you thought maybe why it took so long to get off and him throwing the baggage out there.
Well, it had a 2-position prop, high RPM and low RPM. You took off in high RPM, and it had pretty good thrust there. And then when you got your cruising speed, you pulled it back to the low RPM and throttle back and cruise that way. I don't know this to be a fact, but I think Roland Barnick, not having flown the plane before, I think he was taking off in low RPM, because usually the plane would take off without any problem in high RPM. But he barely got off with the load he had aboard, and well, was having so much trouble getting up. He trying to lighten his load. He had all of his passengers throw out everything they could throw out, luggage and everything else that they could throw out, even some parachutes, so that it lightened the load, and he did eventually get up high enough to go on down to Panay. I haven't talked with Barnick. I don't know if this be a fact, but having flown it myself, I think he must have been taken off in low RPM position.
To your recollection, is the paint job on our Candy Clipper anywhere similar, or how different is our representation? Because to my knowledge, there were no pictures.
The two birds are not exactly the same. Yours, of course, is much cleaner and newer and nicer. And as I recall, the cowl on the one that I flew was much more narrow than this one. This is a big, full-blown cowl. That's a difference that I can tell. And we didn't have a tail hook, yours does. But I can recognize it as a duck.
What do you think of the opportunity to come down and maybe go flying in a duck and a P-40?
Oh, I'm excited about it. I haven't seen one for a long, long time, and although this is a much more modern one than I flew, I'm looking forward to flight in it.
This is the last version that they built. This is a -6, and I guess you said you flew it too. And this had a much bigger engine, and the one that you flew, I think, you remember, and it had a little small ring cowl.
It did, and I believe it was the Cyclone engine.
Yeah, same one, but...
I'm not certain, but it might have been a two-bladed prop.
Really?
I'm not sure of that. I can't remember.
Go back and do some research. Well, this is 1,200 horsepower, and the one you flew, I think, was about 900 or something like that. So.
Well, it had a two-position prop.
Uh-huh.
I can't recall whether it was three-bladed or two-bladed. It's been a long time.
Well, this is a fully constant speed. So this thing's got a lot. This has got pretty good performance.
Much more modern.
And how fast did you say you were going in your duck?
90 knots is the best we could get out of it.
That's about
cruising.
105 miles an hour, and this does about 140. So, well, good. You ready to go fly?
I'm ready.
Oh, let's do it.
Of course, I'm 92 now. You must
92?
Give me credit for that.
I'll keep the ladder steady and just make sure, and just take your time.
All right.
Yeah, that moves. So if you could just
That's
get,
it, these knees, the only thing about
just stand right on the seat.
Right.
Oh, then I think you got it. There we go. This is not the easiest airplane to get in and out of. All right, good deal. Well, we tried to.
First time I've ever been in the back seat.
First time in the back seat. I'm not going to worry too much about the parachute.
All right.
I don't think you're going to use it if you
Yeah,
did.
I'm doing that, so.
This thing's really good for mosquito control.
I see what you mean. Is this a right engine?
Yeah, right Cyclone 1820, 1200 horsepower.
Yeah, they always did smoke a bit, I thought.
A little bit blind.
Very much blind from back here.
All right, nobody on final. I got a biplane down there at south of the field.
Shall I close the canopy now?
Yeah, close canopy. Okay, y'all closed?
Not yet, just a minute. Okay now.
Okay, here goes the run-up. Okay, props forward, mixture's rich, superchargers in low, tail wheel is still unlocked, trim is set, mags are both, water rudder is unlocked, and the landing gear is down. I got the boost pumps on, controls, we're all ready to go. Here we go. a couple of passes.
Okay.
Let me get a little altitude, Joe, then I'll let you fly it.
Okay.
Okay, Jay, you got it.
Okay.
You got to hold a little bit of left aileron to keep the wings level, just a little bit.
Okay. I don't have much visibility, so keep me clear up front.
And just do whatever you want to do.
I can't see much up front, so don't let me run into anybody.
Hey, Joe, I bet this brings back memories.
Well, I don't remember. It's hard to fly. Back then, at least.
Yeah, I guess most of your flying was all at night.
All of it was, except that first one. Well, it's sort of fun, but I'm ready to go back whenever you're ready.
Okay. Okay, Fantasy flights off to the left. I'll do one pass and then we'll land, okay?
Okay, you got it?
I got it. The wheels are down, we're going in on the land.
Righto.
Joe. First time in a dog in about, that's about, what, 65 years?
At least.
Unbelievable. Let me tee it up real quick. I'll get up on the... Doing better. Okay, so now just if you can, Joe, just come step back.
Over here.
Yeah, if you can, or go.
I can't step here, can I?
Yeah, but you can stand on that one there if you want. Come down one, then come up. There we go. Okay. Right foot here.
Pull me in there?
Yeah, if you can. Can you get that foot in there? There you go. Left foot will work. Got handles up here. There you go. And I'll keep the parachute up for you. All right. I'm just trying to think. It was 1941, right? So would this be 65 years? 42, 60, December of 42.
41.
Yeah, December of 42.
March.
Okay. Could be 48 plus 6.
February, March, April of
64 years. So what's it feel like, 64 years, Joe, back in the day?
I feel I'm 64 years old, I tell you. But it's fun. And,
Joe, it's been a pleasure to give you a ride in this
Thank you.
thing.
I
It's
sure
a great
enjoyed
thing
it.
you guys
Appreciate
did
you
back
doing
then, and
well,
what a great honor. Thank you.
we didn't do too much. The teeth kicked in, really.
Take it real easy, Joe. Okay? All right. You come on. Okay, just come on back. I got you. There we go.
Thank you. I didn't know it was quite that deep.
Joe, if I could get you to sign this seat here, I'd appreciate it. Just put the original candy clipper file. March of 1942, and then yesterday was February 18th, 2006. All right, Joe, thank you. What a great thing.
Thank you.